What's up, everybody? You're on the Low Ball Pod. He's Lucas. I'm Owen, and today we're going to be talking about some more fantasy football, continuing on our trend from last week where we kicked off our football coverage with some training camp news and a mock draft. We're continuing to get you guys ready for the fantasy football season, which is already upon us with drafts coming up within the next few weeks and stuff as preseason starts. We had our first preseason game, the Hall of Fame game, on Thursday, I think it was. So very exciting time in the NFL season. We're trying to figure out all these guys and their usage, especially with the running backs who we're going to be tiering today. Very important to keep up with all the updates on how these guys are being used in training camp and how everybody looks. So we're going to be breaking it down, dropping them into these 6 tiers that we've created here that we think kind of distinguish the guys well enough. And yeah, you got anything to say, Lucas?
Yeah, man. Happy to be back here with you again for episode 4. As we know, calendar has now flipped to August, and we are getting increasingly closer to the NFL season, which means by default the fantasy season as well. So yeah, we'll be running through today just some RB tiers and how we evaluate each of these guys in reference to each other. And I think a tier list is kind of an appropriate way to break this down because it kind of just gives a basis for the area that we designate each player. And of course, there are small discrepancies that will separate the players in each field. And a lot of that is for you guys to decide as well in your drafts. Of course, the guys that you're feeling, the guys that you may be a little bit more hesitant on. But yeah, looking forward to getting into this and breaking down some running backs.
Yeah, me too. I mean, and me specifically, I'm a huge running back guy in fantasy. I always think it's one of the most important things, if not the most important, to get your running backs, figured out. Make sure that you have 2 guys who are going to be consistently getting a lot of opportunities each week because, in this league that has become increasingly pass heavy, there's a lot of different receiver weapons out there. There's always seems to be some breakouts, some rookies who come on. And also you can just, obviously spread it around. The better the offense is, you can support multiple wide receivers, but in fantasy, it's really important to have those bell cow running backs that you can rely on and give you that floor for your team. So yeah, that's how I like to think of these guys as kind of the foundation of what it's going to be. So I'm always going to be investing pretty heavily in running backs. My top 2 guys I like to get out of the way in the first 3 rounds or so, 3 or 4 rounds. But yeah, it's gonna be fun to get into these guys.
I'd say a good basis maybe to go off is in your first 50 picks, you'd probably like to have 2 running backs on your roster by then.
Definitely.
There's quite a steep fall off, I think, right around that point in most drafts.
Mm-hmm.
And me personally, I just feel way more comfortable knowing I have 2 solid running backs going into the season, especially because, of course, this is probably the most injury-prone position as well. So the lack of kind of stability there is a big factor for me when I'm looking at which positions do I want to load up on early.
Yeah, and it just makes a lot of sense when you're thinking about the run game and the elite backs of the NFL these days. It's like there's not as many. It's definitely shifted more to a pass heavy league, although last year we saw maybe a little bit of a switch in that. Definitely got a little closer as you're seeing these teams with a lot of the too high shells that are trying to cut out the passing trend that's been taken over kind of modern football. So I think we have a lot of guys with good opportunities, and yeah, I'm excited to get into these guys. So you want to start? Looks like we got Aaron Jones is the first guy here, who's a pretty interesting case to me. Aaron Jones, very talented back, smart runner, can do a little in the pass game too. And he had a pretty great first season with the Vikings last year. I mean, being in that offense is a huge plus. They have a great line, great play caller in O'Connell. So Jones has a great situation, but he is another guy who has had a longer career and throughout his career has definitely battled injury and has a lot of wear and tear on him. So you could even see in kind of the back half of last year. I know he went down for a bit and there was a couple of scares. So they bring in Jordan Mason this year, who I think we'll be able to get into later. I think he's on this list. Yeah, I see him there. So I do think that Minnesota takes a little more of a staggered approach this year. I like Aaron Jones' talent, but I don't think that he can really take on too big of a workload at this point in his career. And yeah, I'll let you say a little more on him before we decide where he belongs. But
Yeah, I think everything you said is pretty spot on for Jones. Definitely a pretty solid year last season. Maybe a quiet 1100 plus on the ground for him. Um, and I think Minnesota did, of course, surprise a lot of people last season with the success they had. But yeah, Jones again, I believe he's going into a season where he'll be turning 30 during this year. So again, a back who's getting a little bit older. He had a great prime. Um, but we might be seeing more so this being the tail end of the career of Aaron Jones. And I mean, he could still definitely provide some solid value this year, but like you said, Jordan Mason coming in, he should take some ample volume you'd expect. And I guess another factor here is just if you're a believer in JJ McCarthy and what he's going to be doing in his first season, maybe you can move Jones a little bit more up in your point of view. But yeah, for me, I think that yellow tier low end RB2 flex would be a pretty appropriate spot for someone like Aaron Jones, someone who we kind of already know who he is, and the ceiling doesn't seem to be anything too crazy this year.
yeah, I agree. I would definitely have him in that yellow tier there. I do think that he's maybe more towards the bottom of that. I don't really know how comfortable I am with him being my actual RB2 this year just because he has the usage questions. He is an older back who does tend to get banged up. So definitely not a guy I want to be relying on, but you know that there's going to be some great weeks where he gets involved in the passing game. He's a shifty guy who can get in the end zone. And I know they definitely gave him a lot of touches last year. And I again, it's not a question of necessarily skill with me for Jones, like we've said, great career, but definitely just more of a question than you'd like in any of the tiers
Yeah.
above. So I think that's the
And
right spot for him.
maybe one just positive word for him on the touchdown front, maybe some positive regression this year. I think he only hit the pay dirt 5 times last season. So maybe he has 6 or 7 in him this year, but yeah, I think that's a good spot for Jones.
So up next here we have Alvin Kamara, who is coming off a nice kind of resurgence year last year. He was dealing with injuries the past couple years before that, and he comes in and kind of reminds us of this fantasy demon that we came to love with Kamara. Obviously, you got a great receiver, and last year they ran that wide zone offense with Clint Kubiak, who was designed a pretty strong run game, I think, especially in those early weeks. So we know Kamara's capable of contributing in both the run and the pass game. But I think the big question this year is just the offense season. We've seen the Saints just kind of start to transition a little bit towards the next era. They bring in Tyler Shuck in the draft. Obviously, with Derek Carr retiring too, it seems like they're in less of like a win now mode for sure. A lot of questions with the offense in terms of obviously you're bringing in a second round rookie to be your QB, so the can't bet on the pass game. It does bring up potentially a good amount of usage for Kamara and a guy who, like last year, still was able to kind of produce in a situation that wasn't that good. So I do definitely have a lot more confidence in a guy like Kamara where he doesn't have a Jordan Mason type of guy riding him for touches. They do have Kendre Miller and they bring in a rookie in the draft. Was it DJ Giddens or it might be I'm blanking on the name, the little guy out of Kansas who's a good runner, but nothing too serious in terms of competition for Kamara. And yeah, we've seen Kamara's a great PPR back. I'm personally probably pretty comfortable with him as an RB2. I think that's a good slot for him. Where would you place him?
Yeah, I think RB2 is a good evaluation for Kamara. He was a top of the line RB1 for a good amount of the season last year. And
Mm-hmm.
like you said, a lot of the appeal with him does come from the pass catching ability, and he's just really a PPR beast. And if you play in a league that, of course, rewards you a point for every catch, Kamara is a rock solid RB2. But I do just want to circle back to the concern you had. And for me, it is a very heavy one at that. Probably one of, if not the worst, offensive outlook for a team this season might be the Saints. Vegas projects around 4.5 wins for them this year. So again, with a back like Kamara, that may not be the worst thing, because with the game script, even if they're down, he should always be involved, at least in the pass game. But yeah, at the end of the day, the goal line, red zone opportunities for Kamara, you think might be few and far between this year.
Yeah. I do think the fact that he is kind of like the the guy in this offense, he's kind of going to be the main guy who they're trying to funnel the ball towards, and they have actually committed to him long term. I think it was end of last year they gave him a pretty friendly contract extension. So they have no reason not to try to give Kamara a very healthy workload, and I think that's why I'm even though the offense might be great, the might not be great. The line is still pretty solid. You have the two young tackles, and then you have McCoy coming back on the inside. So they were a good line to start the year last year before injuries came, and I believe that they can do that again. They bring in Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator from Philadelphia last year that I mentioned earlier. So I do have a little bit of optimism for Kamara. Personally, I think he's in that green tier. You think that's a good spot for
I
him?
think,
Probably towards the
yeah,
bottom of it,
I would say
but
more on the bottom end, yeah, of
one I
someone you
actually
could say is a strong RB2.
yeah, I have him as the second to last guy in that tier actually. So definitely towards the bottom. But if Alvin Kamara's my RB2 going into next year, there's definitely worse things, and I would consider it a pretty strong RB room.
Definitely.
Um, all right. So next is a really exciting conversation. Ashton Genty for the Raiders, who obviously is taken in the draft at number 6, is going to be the first rookie taken off the board in your fantasy drafts this year. And as mentioned in the last episode, one of just the most exciting running back prospects in a while in the NFL. I mean, you'll see here that I'm probably more bullish on Genty than most. I have seen myself taken him a lot at the back half of the first round in a lot of my fantasy drafts. Just kind of the contact balance, the pass catching ability, and I think to his letter to the NFL right before he got drafted, pretty much where he's saying in a game where the goal is to tackle people, he's the guy who you can't tackle, and that is really just the epitome of Ashton Genty right there. Short guy, low center of gravity, and just a pest. Can do a little bit of everything in the run game. Is going to be able to go outside. Has the breakaway speed to make those big explosive plays. Is able to also get into the inside gaps with his low center of gravity and contact balance. Like I mentioned, he's a really fun, tantalizing prospect, and I'm super excited for him. I'd feel comfortable, like I said, taking him in the first round, which would make him in that hero RB tier. I know not everyone is necessarily as high on the situation, but I like the offense with Geno coming in there. I think Brock can take another step. It's definitely a question if they have that down the field weapon for the passing game. So something that can prevent teams from loading up the box too much. But this is a physical team. Their line probably not projected to be the best unit in the league, but they do have some potential. They did lock down Colton Miller the other day, so no contract concerns there. And with a Pete Carroll offense too, bringing in the new regime, he's a guy who loves to run the ball, sees it as like a key core part of the football team's identity, loves the toughness. I mean, we saw Marshawn Lynch just get kind of fed the ball year after year in Seattle. Obviously didn't do it in the Super Bowl on the goal line there, but still going to be a team that's going to want to run the ball and play physical. And I think Ashton Genty just is a game-changing part of an offense where he's a guy. I mean, you take a running back 6 overall in the draft, you're going to get the ball to the guy. You know, that's why you take him. And I expect him to be a pillar defining part of that offense. So I'd have him in the back half of the hero RBs personally.
Yeah, Ashton Genty, definitely. I see that you are very high on him, and I really can't fault you for it. This is an electric prospect and a player that has a lot of people excited, both in the real NFL scene and for fantasy football purposes. Did just want to run through some of his senior season stats at Boise State because they kind of are just really ridiculous.
It's a crazy
1,843 rushing yards in his senior season, and this guy was averaging 8 yards per carry. Can we just sit back and acknowledge that stat for a moment? Like, he's also, like you said, an incredibly capable pass catcher. He had over 800 yards through the air as well this past season, and 41 total touchdowns Ashton Genty scored last year for Boise State. So, yeah, I mean, he is just gleaming with upside, and there are definitely worse offensive cores out there than an Ashton Genty with a Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers, right? So, I mean, this is a team that we could see be significantly better this year. Vegas is currently projecting them around 6.5 wins, so maybe a little bit under 500 or a 500 type of team. But yeah, for me personally, I think just because he's a rookie, I might put him a little bit more in just the RB1 tier. But if you want to throw him in hero RB, I'm really not mad at that.
Yeah. Another kind of stat to look at from his senior year is he had one of the highest yards after contact. I think it was like top 3 since they started charting that stat at PFF, just behind a guy like Saquon Barkley. So, I mean, he's just a little kind of pinball who can just bounce off tackles and stuff. And I think, obviously, you mentioned the risk with him being a rookie. It is going to be one of the most risky first-round picks. Obviously, a lot of people have that bad taste in their mouth from Marvin Harrison last year, who was billed as like this generational prospect. But to me, like, Genty just offers a lot of value with the fact that he's unknown. People are kind of scared to take him. And I mean, personally, I would not be like surprised at the end of the season if we're talking about this guy as like best back in the league conversation. And running back, obviously a position where these guys come in and make instant impact all the time. Think about even Saquon's rookie year, like lit the league on fire. You got guys like Todd Gurley in the past. Bijan Gibbs came right in and made an impact, and he has the runway to do it. No real competition. I expect him to be a full workhorse guy who's capable of doing everything. So I think I'll put him in the back of hero RB for now. We'll see if that gets a little too crowded. Maybe we'll bump him down. But yeah, I think he's kind of in the back half of that. If you're getting flirting with the first round as a running back, you know, it's hard to not be a hero guy when you're building your team around him. But yeah, obviously there is maybe a mini kind of tier within. Like I'd say the top 3 guys are pretty consensus. Those guys, but if you want to expand the tier a little bit more than 3 guys, I think
he might be the next guy you throw in.
Yeah, next guy or 2 for sure. But anyways, if we want to jump to Austin Eckler here, I don't know what you think of Eckler, but he is not a guy I'm super excited about. Put up a pretty solid year last year, sharing the backfield with Brian Robinson and filled in as that pass catching kind of third down back role. He will retain that role again this year. I know there's a lot of word about the rookie Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt this year in Washington camp, so does have a little pressure on him, and already was one of two back. To me, like Eckler, definitely a guy who gets drafted, but not a guy who you really want to rely on at all. He's kind of like worst case scenario, like he maybe could get thrown into your flex if you have a lot of buys or a lot of injuries in some week or something. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a good offense, I definitely think, and he will get receptions. So in PPR, he's going to be a good player. And yeah, I should mention that we do rank for PPR. I think it's kind of the most popular, most standard thing. So yeah, full point PPR. He will definitely get drafted. Is going to be a bench player though, ultimately.
Yeah, don't have too much to say about Eckler. You kind of hit it on the nose.
Yeah.
Most of the upside from him would kind of just revolve around the Brian Robinson injury. But
Mm-hmm.
I'd feel pretty comfortable just throwing him right in the bench RB tier. Guy
Yeah.
with minimal upside, but should provide some value for Washington.
Yeah, and he's definitely going to be one of the lower guys that we talk about in this. So,
The next guy is not.
yeah, pretty stark contrast here with Bijan Robinson, who we talked about in the mock draft episode. Both of our like 101s, if we had the pick, best running back for us and best overall safest pick, I'd say. I don't know if he's that for you too, but yeah, Bijan's another guy who came into the league, was extremely touted running back prospect, goes inside the top 10 to the Falcons, which has been just a great landing spot for them. They love to run the ball. They have such a wide zone culture, with Lindstrom inside being one of the best run blocking interior offensive linemen in the league, and just a team that has built itself off this wide zone. And Bijan just is able to do whatever. He catches a lot of passes. He actually maybe didn't break as many big runs as you would have expected last year, but I honestly see that as room for very like positive regression. When you watch Bijan, he's a guy who can make anyone miss at any moment and is clearly has the speed to break away runs. So I think it's just a matter of time until those opportunities start breaking. And, I think this offense probably projects to be a little bit better depending on Michael Penix. He was very strong at the end of last year, but if this is a team that can pose more of a threat in the passing game, it's only going to help Bijan out too, opening it up. So yeah, I mean, not too much to say about Bijan other than that he's very great and will be one of the first picks in your fantasy drafts for sure.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Like we have both said in the past, probably my 1-1 pick this year if I do end up with that pick in any of my drafts. Just a running back that checks all of the boxes, like we've said before. And yeah, like you said, maybe even a little bit more room for improvement with a lack of those kind of big breakaway plays. And a guy that still finished third in the league last year in yards after contact, too, with over 700. Over 1,400 rushing yards last year. A lot of action in the pass catching game, over 60 receptions, goes a long way in PPR, and 14 rushing touchdowns as well to complement that. Michael Penix stepping in year two, definitely the upside for a more explosive offense, especially with how abysmal that Kirk Cousins quarterback play was for him last year at the beginning of the year. But yeah, nice and simple, an elite blend of power, agility, vision, just one of the best backs in the league and a guy who should be off the board in the first 3 picks.
Yeah, and in the second half of last year, we know he got off to not the best start, still provided a pretty solid floor, but after week 6, he averaged 22.8 fantasy points a game, which was the best of any running back, and also 23.3 touches for 120.9 yards per game, which is just production that speaks for itself. 14 touchdowns, and yeah, he's just gonna be the focal point of this offense and is one of the premier backs in the league. A guy who you expect to go out on any given day and accrue 100 yards or over and get some looks at the end zone. So Bijan sits atop our rankings. Now here's a really interesting one. Breece Hall coming off an incredibly disappointing year last year. I know a lot of people got burned for taking him early, yourself included, in one league. What do you have to say about Breece?
Yeah, I was an unfortunate drafter of Breece Hall in one of my leagues last year. I have to mention as well that I followed it up with a pick of Marvin Harrison too, so that was an awesome start to my draft last year. But yeah, I mean, Breece was a very disappointing player, and that's evidenced by his ADP dropping about 40 spots this year. And I mean, he's a guy who even at this spot, I don't even know if I feel that safe about him. I mean, I know he has some competition in Braylon Allen, who, when he was on the field last season, he seemed to be a better performer than Breece. And I mean, this offense at the same time, on top of that, does not project to be very explosive. And I mean, yeah, I don't have too much positive to say about Breece Hall's outlook this season. I I don't know if I'm comfortable calling him a strong RB2. That it might be somewhere in between where I value like an Aaron Jones and Alvin Kamara. But yeah, Breece Hall is like a borderline top 20 back to me this year.
Yeah, I mean, me personally, I certainly don't consider him a strong RB2. He's not a guy I think that you can rely on to have a solid workload each week. I mean, he goes into last year as the clear RB1 and just disappoints even when given ample amount of opportunities. I mean, even though he didn't have the production, I remember in the first game, like being like super stoked about all the touches he's getting and especially his role in the pass game. And he did kind of remain a solid pass game guy and receiver. He was top 5 in routes, targets, and catches for the second season in a row. So he definitely does have that on lockdown. But you mentioned the younger running back, Braylon Allen, in that room, big athletic guy. And when I was watching this backfield last year, I personally thought that Allen looked like the clear better runner, and that Breece personally just might be a guy who unfortunately is maybe not going to recover from that unfortunate ACL injury that he sustained a few years back. Really since then hasn't come out and looked like the same explosive back who was able to make these big plays out of the backfield. And I will say that the Jets offense this year with Fields at the helms looks to be a unit that is obviously going to tap into the run game a little bit more, and they draft the tackle Membu in the first round in the top 10 to strengthen up that line. So I do like this line, and potentially would be a good situation for maybe another guy because I'm not super high on Breece Hall's overall outlook as a player or a fantasy option. I do want to note that when asked about the running back room at the league annual meetings, new Jets coach Aaron Glenn wanted to speak about all 3 backs rather than highlight just Breece Hall. I think the question was like something like, what do you think of like Breece Hall? And he's like, yeah, we have 3 great running backs, rather than, yeah, Breece is going to be a core part of our offense. Like he did something similar for Garrett Wilson or Sauce Gardner, the 2 guys who we saw get paid. So I don't think the Jets necessarily see Breece as a focal point of their team or their offense. So I agree with that low end RB2 ranking. And honestly, like obviously Jones has the workload issues, but I like Jones's situation a little more. I like Jones a little bit more as a player. I know consensus definitely has Brees above him, so and I
I'm
know,
not mad at putting him over Jones, in all honesty. Or, I mean, putting Jones over him, in all honesty.
yeah. I mean,
If you
if it
want,
was in my personal list, I actually have these guys neck and neck at RB 25 and Brees Hall at 26, which is definitely pretty against consensus there. But yeah, I mean, personally, I would favor Jones, honestly.
yeah, you can put him there. Yeah, and it's funny you do mention that. I definitely remember in the Jets' opening game last season, just Brees getting a ton of volume in that opening quarter,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't do much with it, but it was just promising at the time to see, like, oh yeah, they're really bought into Brees. Like he's just going to be a workhorse monster this year, and just never came to fruition. But
Yeah, I mean, I remember like I was thinking of trading for him after that game, and he definitely looked like he was going to be a key part of that. Looked like a guy who they wanted to get involved, but unfortunately wasn't able to make the most of his opportunities. You could definitely see why he was drafted so high last year. The role was there, but
a guy who
maybe
was
the
taken
talent.
with some first overall picks last season.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I saw him as the number one prospect on some people's boards. So, um, little
yeah.
unfortunate story for Brees Hall there, but we'll move on with a guy that I know we're both pretty excited about and maybe a little higher on consensus than is Brian Robinson, who is going pretty late in drafts right now. He's definitely like a probably like around 6 or 7 round guy, maybe even
Yeah,
later.
I've seen
Um,
him like round 8. Yeah,
yeah,
down there.
I mean, he is gonna be the lead back. They didn't bring any running backs in this season, maybe to some people's surprise, but he's gonna be the lead back in a great offense that we saw last year was like top 5 in efficiency in pretty much every metric in the league last year. You share a backfield with Jaden Daniels, who is always going to have the threat on that option, so you're not going to have those DNs crashing in on him. And Brian Robson, excellent goal line back for an offense that's we anticipate will be in the red zone a lot. He's not necessarily the biggest play threat, like not going to be a very explosive guy, not going to get too much work in the pass game, but I think just having a uh, given like solid role in a good offense is the guy who's going to be the main touchdown guy. Like, wouldn't surprise anyone if he leads the Commanders in total touchdowns this year. I I think that definitely provides a solid floor for a running back and a guy who I could see putting in my lineup on not any given week. I mean, I wouldn't feel great with him necessarily as my RB2, but that's not near the range he goes. And if he's my RB3, like my best option off the bench, I'm certainly fine with him filling in for that a couple weeks. And, depending on how the workload goes, I mean, he could become a solid flex option. There were definitely spans last year where he was averaging around 15 points per game or so. So I like Brian Robinson. I would definitely consider him in that tier there that we have with Brees and Jones. I would have him pretty close to those two guys.
Yeah, I would put him right in that tier too. And like you said, a lot of the value with Robinson just lies within that ADP. Like if this is a guy that you can grab in your 8th or 9th round, and maybe as your RB, maybe your first RB on the bench or your second RB on the bench, I think that's something to feel great about. Um, just like you said as well, a guy that's going to get goal line action for a team that projects to be a strong offensive squad. Of course, with the news circulating with Terry, that could definitely impact Brian if he is actually moved. Again, I don't really expect Terry to be moved at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
but as long as he's there and this offense is running it back with that similar core, bringing in Debo Samuel, maybe he can give you a little bit extra. Brian Robinson could be a guy that hits double-digit rushing touchdowns, and that alone provides a lot of value and could allow a lot of guys to slip into the top 20 RBs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just a guy who dominated goal line work last year. He had 4 TDs and 8 carries inside the 5 last year, which is pretty great numbers to have.
Commanders' win line is also 9.5, so they definitely project some success for this offense.
Yeah, and still fairly young. I think he's 26 or so, 27. Not. I mean, I know he was a little banged up last year. I'm not too worried about it. I guess the question is, where do we feel comfortable with him here?
I think maybe right behind Brees.
Yeah, I think that's actually exactly. It's pretty funny that these 3 guys are next to each other because I have them in this exact order on my overall ranking.
And they all have very different ADPs. Like Brees, you got to get in like the 5th round. Aaron Jones is more 6, 7.
Yeah.
And then Brian Robinson like 8th, 9th round. So
yeah,
definitely some value there in that tier.
Yep, all guys who I think would be good RB3s. Definitely, like we said, in kind of the lower half of this tier. But the next guy we have, certainly not going to be in this RB3 tier. Bucky Irving, who comes out last year and just great story as kind of a later round pick, a guy who isn't necessarily the most like explosive athlete in the world, but just a guy who's tough to tackle and is able to, bounce around, make a lot of cuts, and was eventually able to unseat Rashad White, who went pretty early in drafts last year once he got the opportunity. I know that the first half of the season, his snaps are maybe a little, or his stats are maybe a little affected because he wasn't obviously a highly drafted running back who was going to come in and instantly go. But from week 6 on, he was fantasy's number 10 overall running back and produced 15 plus fantasy points in 9 of his final 12 games. And I love Bucky. The question with him isn't with him as a player. It's more just the exit of Liam Cohen, who was a first-year offensive coordinator for the Bucks last year and was able to just kind of rejuvenize this run game and draw up just some beautiful looks for Irving with a great line. So, I mean, he still has that great line, still seems like a great situation where he will be the lead back and get a lot of touches. I think he's maybe not a guy who you want to rely on as your top running back like he is being drafted as right now. But I like Bucky a lot as a player.
Bucky's a very good player. I'm in a similar boat to you with him. I'm not quite as high as maybe consensus is on Bucky this year. For me, he's like right outside the top 10 backs, maybe right in that area.
Mm-hmm.
A guy who quietly did finish top 10 in total rushing yards last year, right at 10. He had a little bit over 1,100, 5.4 yards a carry. The talent is not a question for me at all. He is a very good back and a guy that will also provide value in the passing game as well. It is more, my question more lies with kind of what you said with the Bucks as a whole. A team that averaged 29.5 points last year, that was obviously exceptional, and they definitely exceeded expectations there. If you are of the mindset that this is legit and Baker Mayfield is going to run it back and throw for 40-plus touchdowns again and just be an elite option there, then I would encourage you to draft Bucky Irving, because then that likely means that you think this is going to be an elite offense. But to me, I definitely do expect a little bit of regression there. And I would consider Bucky an RB1, but I wouldn't put him in that hero RB tier. And I think there's a pretty sizable gap between at least who we have there now, the Bijan and the Ashton Genty, and then Bucky
Definitely
a good bit below. So
yeah, I think RB1 does make sense for him, especially with how efficient he was last year with his looks. And yeah, the only question would be, like you said, that offense repeating how great it was last year. So I know I'd say he's a fringe RB1. I think you're right there. Not necessarily the guy who aligns perfectly with my strategy. I wouldn't want him as the best running back on my team, but I can certainly he goes there, and I can certainly see him returning that value. So
Definitely.
we'll put him in this RB1. Would be the back of it for me, but RB1 tier nonetheless for us. Next up, we have the Giants rookie Cam Scatabo, your team. So
Yes,
can take the
sir.
lead on Scatabo.
Um, Definitely excited to bring this guy in here. For his rookie season, I'm not exactly sure
Mm-hmm.
how involved he's going to be, mainly because of the breakout we saw last season from Tyrone Tracy, who
Right.
gave us some great offense. And I mean, at the end of the day, even if this is a split backfield, which I likely think that is the outcome here, I don't think that's too much of a bad thing for Scatabo. I mean, it should at least help his conditioning and his efficiency on that end. I mean, this is a guy who just ran for over 1,700 yards last year at Arizona State and clearly is an elite talent with plenty of room for upside. His rookie season, I don't project anything too big, so I think an appropriate area might be the RB3 with upside. If
Mm-hmm.
Tracy goes down, maybe there are some conversations to be had about what his ceiling is then and his rest of season outlook if that was to occur. But for now, especially with the Giants projected to be a lower end offense this year, I think RB3 with upside for rookie year Cam Scatabo.
Yeah, with their gauntlet of a schedule, I don't think they're projected to
Yes.
be hammering the ball too much. Which is the type of running back that Scatabo is. He's just a tough, pissed off runner. So I do think that him and Tracy complement each other pretty well, with Scatabo being that kind of downhill between the tackles guy, who's going to run pissed off headfirst probably into a defensive tackle in the backfield on that offense. But um, he does also give some pass catching looks. He caught a lot of passes last year at Arizona, so he does have that. And I do think there is the potential for him to just be the better running back in the backfield, between him and Tracy, and take that over, but definitely not the guaranteed role that you look for in a guy that you're going to rely on in a higher value add. So he definitely couldn't be anything more than an RB3. And I think with the kind of ambiguity of the role, I think the RB3 with upside tier is nice. He is a guy who I really don't mind taking a risk on with where he goes, and with the talent that he's shown to be at Arizona State, and the workload that he's able to carry. I think there is a world maybe where he unseats Tracy and does get most of the workload in this backfield, especially on early downs. But again, don't know how great of a running offense this is really going to be, and he won't be an every down back, at least at first, or unless there's some type of injury. So definitely an interesting case and a fun case with Scatabo. I hope the best for him, because he was a fun player to watch in college, but I do think that he'll have to wait a little bit to get um really full, like super fantasy relevant workload. So I think RB3 with upside is the perfect tier for him.
Definitely.
Um
And just a thing to mention, he's a guy I see go off the board a good amount, like over a guy like Brian Robinson. So that is an area
mhm.
where I would definitely lean Robinson. Giants bias aside, I do love Scatabo. I think he's going to be great, but like in that area, I would definitely target someone like Robinson who's more established and has a more clear pathway to instant success.
Yeah, Robinson gets really disrespected in these drafts. Honestly, he would be he's a good sleeper pick, I'd say, especially with where he's at. We like him as an RB3, so that's definitely not where he's getting taken. But a guy who is pretty polarizing this year, and I know you had some shares of Chase Brown, luckily last year.
He did
What
help
do
me
you think?
secure a ring.
Yeah,
He's
I mean, this guy was electric in the back half of last year, so I know you had the joy of seeing him go.
beautiful running back stack I had of Mr. Jameer Gibbs and Chase Brown. That was a good time. But yeah, as you can imagine, after he did help me out with getting a ring last year, I'm definitely in on Chase Brown this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think he is a very talented back who is in an awesome offensive situation. Of course, the main selling point for Brown last year that kind of catapulted him was the pass catching. He was getting spoon fed by Joe Burrow in the second half of the year, mainly after Moss went down.
Mm-hmm.
And after Moss did get down and he stepped into that full time role, we saw him play at least 79.7% of the offensive snaps in every game then on. And from that point, he had over 23 touches per game. You can argue that that may not be sustainable over the full course of a season, but just wanted to put in perspective the kind
Mm-hmm.
of workload that they entrusted in him last year. And in that, with that workload, he was able to average 20.6 PPR fantasy points a game from that point on. So that is solid RB1 production for pretty much half of the season. The one concern that I do have here is the offensive line, of course, for the Bengals.
Yeah.
We did touch on this a little bit in our other video, but PFF is currently grading them in as the 31st overall offensive line. So definitely something to monitor, especially with a guy who wasn't the most efficient last year. But I just think, aside from that, the passing upside, the involvement, and definitely I've heard some positive things out of Bengals camp as well. I've heard some Alvin Kamara comparisons for Chase Brown coming out of there, which is kind of exciting. But yeah, I mean, it's an explosive and agile back. He's in a solid offense, and if you have Chase Brown as your RB1 this year, I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah. Um, and like you said, last year after Chase or Zach Moss goes down in week 8, from week 9 on, when Brown gets that RB1 share, he averaged 19 carries a game, 5.5 targets a game for 23.5 touches, and was able to amount 116 yards per game, which was good for 20.6 fantasy points per game through that stretch, fourth highest among running backs. So, I mean, that's an elite back. And you mentioned that you paired him with Gibbs. They're in that same kind of mold as these small, incredibly speedy backs who can catch it and just make an explosive at any play. Chase Brown's always going to be like one of the fastest guys on the field. So he's always a threat for a big play. And in that offense, there is always the opportunity for that with all the stress that you have to worry about down the field. So, yeah, I love Chase Brown this year. I think the question about him is, again, going to be just with that size, how much of a role he is actually able to carve out for himself. I don't necessarily, I know they didn't really bring in anyone, so I'm sure they are going to be expecting him to come in and have a pretty similar role to what he did last year. But I think probably for his sake, almost a little too, they might scale it back from how extreme it was towards the end of last year. I don't know if he can physically take it because he is definitely one of the smaller running backs that we'll talk about. But yeah, what you said, you wouldn't mind him as like your running back 1 on your
Oh,
team. I see the upside for that, but I definitely think he is, for those reasons, maybe safer as like an RB2. I know he goes probably like what's third round or so, third or fourth round.
around there. Yeah, just me personally, I think I would take him over a Bucky Irving. That might be a hot take, but yeah, that I would just, at least for me, I would put him in that same tier.
Yeah. Um, it is a pretty good debate from two smaller backs who are going to give you explosive plays. He is, in my opinion, either at the very top of strong RB2 or the very bottom of RB1.
Yeah, you can put him either spot.
Yeah, I think he is he is a very high upside guy for sure. Like, I mean, if he comes in and is able to have the same situation that he had for the end of last year, I think they'd love that. But at the same time, I don't think he's a guy that is going to be able to like sustain that many carries. I know they didn't plan on it originally, so they do have those running. They have Moss coming back. They bring in Samaje Perine, who I don't think are very good competition, but I do think that they might get a couple of early down looks. I know they're going to want Brown on the field as much as they can, but I think it's just really kind of his inability to be a true 3-down back, which hold me back from being super comfortable with him as my RB1. So, in my opinion, he'd be at the very top of the strong RB2. He's the definition of a strong RB2, in my opinion. If he's my RB2, sure, I feel great about it. But if he's my RB1, I am excited about him, but maybe just a little more hoping.
Yeah, and that would be more so for...
It's an upside play.
Maybe a team that goes receiver, tight end, receiver, something like that, and then you can grab a Chase Brown after.
Yeah, he's a great option when you're trying to stack your pass game, and I know with the kind of the state of receivers this year, very top heavy, it's not a bad strategy to go take 2 elite receivers and have Chase Brown as your RB1. But I think best case scenario, he is your strong RB2.
Yeah, it's a situational RB1, but he did finish, believe it or not, last year RB10 overall. So that's just another reason that I kind of believe in him to finish as an RB1, especially because we didn't see him in a full-time workload the whole season.
Yeah. I think you can kind of debate either there.
Yeah. Next guy.
This is going to be an interesting conversation here. Christian McCaffrey, he's back, and obviously just kind of an all-time fantasy player. If Christian McCaffrey's healthy, he's going to be great. I mean, it's been going around Twitter, the stat that I think it's the past 6 years or so, whenever he's been healthy, he's been at worst RB2. So that is what you're dealing with McCaffrey, who's in a great scenario in San Francisco in that Kyle Shanahan offense. We know that he fits great there. They love to use him in both the run and pass game. But the problem with McCaffrey is he does have that injury history. He is going into his age 29 season and does have just so many carries on his career at this point. And the concern now are those kind of seemingly long-term, like Achilles injuries that he had last year. I was fortunately one of the guys who was cursed with the 101 last year and had to take CMC, and I got him for, 2 games, and he was clearly not his full strength self, and it was just not fun having CMC last year. So, I mean, I'm personally a guy who's just, I'm not going to take that risk, especially that high in the draft. With my early picks, I got to be a little bit safe because these are the foundations for my team. It's an awesome swing. If McCaffrey plays, I'm sure he'll be great. He'll be a top 5 running back at least if he plays every game. But, I mean, at this point, it's hard to bet on that. And I don't know. It's going to be tempting. You see the buzz from Niners camp now. He looks great. Everybody loves him. I'm starting to see him creep up draft boards into that kind of top 7 area. But I don't know. For me, it's inevitable that he does have RB1 overall upside, but he's a guy who I personally wouldn't take unless he just falls a lot and it's worth the risk, because early rounds I'm just not interested in taking that big of a risk.
Yeah, moment of silence last year for all those McCaffrey drafters. My heart goes out to you. That could not have been very fun, just hearing, he'll be good to go week 1. Of course,
they lied
was not
right
the
to
case.
our face.
Yeah, very, very messy on the Niners' end last season, but yeah, I mean, you kind of touched all the bases here. It's very simple with McCaffrey. He's one of the best dual threat running backs of all time when he's healthy. He is often not healthy, but of course, in 2023, when he finished RB1 overall, he led all running backs in rushing yards by over 300 yards and dominated the league. And his anytime touchdown was everybody's favorite bet. So, this can really go 2 ways with McCaffrey. Like you said, RB1 upside overall is easily within the cards. but I am a lot more on your train of kind of tempering expectations and proceeding with caution because of that lengthy injury history.
Yeah, I do think he is a RB1 just off
Okay.
potential alone. If you're drafting him, you're obviously expecting him to be an RB1, and if he's healthy, he will be an RB1. He will have that workload, so he's in there. I
Yeah.
would slot him above Bucky too.
Yeah, you can do
Um,
that.
I mean, to be honest, I know Bucky gets drafted as an RB1. I do see him more in the strong RB2 tier.
Fair.
But I think he's good at the bottom of that for now.
Yeah. Like I said, I do like Chase Brown over Bucky, so I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. And I mean, we can. Should we just bump him down? To
Yeah, you
me,
can bump him
he
down.
seems kind of a tier below the guys I see here. So
Yeah, he'd be a good RB2. Like,
if
for
I'm leaving the
Bucky,
draft, there's not too many scenarios where I'm like ecstatic about Bucky being my RB1.
yeah, if you take him like late second round, like if that's your second player on your team, I'm not feeling great about that personally. So
If he could be like the last pick in the second round,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I mean,
maybe
there's
pick 24. So it's fair.
when I'm looking at the other running backs in the second round, I think I just have a less questions.
Yeah,
But it's hard because I do love Bucky. I do see the vision with that offense, but I don't know if I'm fully bought in enough. But we got another guy to talk about here in Chuba Hubbard, a guy who gets he doesn't go too early in drafts. Definitely is a guy who I've found when I do miss out on kind of the early running backs, I've been able to secure as probably in between like that lower end RB2 to decent RB2. I I wouldn't I don't know if he's the strongest RB2 in the world. But yeah, I mean last year Chuba breaks out on the fantasy scene and is this workhorse back in Carolina behind the heavily invested in offensive line, and he was able to get a contract extension with Carolina. So I do think that they believe in him as in this role as their lead back, but they do also bring in two like not guys who I think have too much of a threat of unseating Chuba for this RB1 role. He's clearly going to be their top back, but they draft Trevor Etienne in I think it was a fourth round pick or so. So not nothing there. It's kind of significant draft compensation. And they do bring in Rico Dowdle as a backup or running back who did actually get like over 1,000 yards last year as Dallas's lead guy. I don't think he should be a lead guy, but he is a pretty quality backup. So to me, like multiple solid moves in the RB room maybe signals to me that yeah, they like Chuba, but it's not going to be necessarily the same situation last year where you're amassing like I think he had probably close to 300 touches last year. So I think that they might try to stagger his workload a little. And this is a guy who was maybe a little more reliant on the workload overall. I mean, he was efficient. I think he was well over like 4.5 yards per carry, which is good, but he is definitely more of a volume based play. And I do think he'll maintain the goal line work, which is big. I do like him still as a running back too, but I don't know if necessarily he's gonna be where he was at last year, where he was like a 250 carry, 1,200 yard guy. I do still like him. I do feel he's probably one of the last guys who I feel okay about being my RB2. Maybe the last guy. I'm not
yeah,
sure where you fall on him.
yeah. Chuba definitely, like you said, breakout guy last year. I think RB2 is kind of just the perfect label for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, yeah, he did finish underratedly top 10 in rushing yards last year with just about 1,200, and he was pretty efficient. Yeah, about 4.8 a carry. He's a good back on a team that is seemingly improving, And like you said, they did bring in a couple other guys to temper the backfield. But I think I'd feel pretty good about Chuba as a solid RB2. A guy who I kind of always see him go around and they're kind of neck and neck to me is like a James Conner.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Hubbard maybe either the back end right behind Kamara for a strong RB2 or like a low end RB2 right in front of Jones.
Mm-hmm.
But I would lean more towards strong RB2, put him right
Yeah.
at the end.
Because I do feel ultimately pretty okay with him being my RB2, whereas low end RB2, it's a little iffy. Yeah, you mentioned James Conner, who I think is in a similar role in an offense that likes to run the ball, is in kind of that more power player mold. And I think the big difference between them would just be the age concerns. Like James Conner is entering his, I don't know, he's at least 30, whereas Chubbard is kind of I think is about 27 years old. So
I
definitely a
see
little
Connor
less worried about the wear and tear
maybe a
there.
little bit down that row if we want to just touch on him now.
Yeah.
He's like right next to Gibbs there if you see him. But
Yeah, go
yeah, I
ahead.
mean, like you said, Connor is definitely a little bit older now. Just hit age 30, I believe, this past season. 2 straight years with at least 1,000 yards on the ground and at least 7 rushing touchdowns. So
Mm-hmm.
just seems to me like another year of him being a safe RB2 option. I know Trey Benson is kind of lurking in the background, and even last season, people did have skepticism about how involved he may be as the season progresses, but he did end up being kind of a non-factor all of last season. Do we see him get worked in a little bit this year? Maybe. But I think James Conner is still a safe RB2 bet. We know what he is. He's a bruising type of back, north-south runner, and I feel like we can kind of just rely on him for that consistent RB2 production.
Yeah, I think he is probably the bottom guy in this tier of being an RB2. And it's mostly just because, like you said, he is a lead back. While you are a little worried about Benson tapping into that workload, he was drafted fairly highly last year. And I did like him as a prospect. You didn't see any Benson at all last year. So Connor clearly able to ward him off. And yeah, just a bruising, consistent, smart runner who's always going to be able to churn out a pretty solid average. And yeah, the usage might go down a little bit. He is getting older, so he is a guy who is at maybe risk of a little bit of a fall off whenever you're kind of waiting for that to happen. So yeah, he does scream kind of bottom of this tier, top of that tier. He's right on the verge. I have him ranked maybe a little lower, but I definitely can see the appeal as an RB2 for him. What do we got next here? We got Montgomery.
Knuckles.
I think
Sorry.
all good. What did you say?
I just said Knuckles.
Yep. Yeah, he's the power in that backfield. Did go down at the end of last year with the injury, but was on great pace. With Montgomery, he's another guy who does have a lot of carries on his career. So also kind of staving off a backfield where Jahmyr Gibbs is just going to bite, I think, more and more into it as he goes and kind of enters his prime. So I think Montgomery is a guy who the past couple years has been a super safe pick later in rounds. He goes later kind of as like your RB3 range guy who is at the very top of that tier, can fill in any week and you feel great about it just because of the Lions' ability to be a great run game these past few years. And he is obviously the face of the goal line work there, their power back. I am just, this is the most worried I'll be about him. Most worried I have been, and the most worried I probably will be in a while. With they lose the center Frank Ragnow, who's one of the best offensive linemen in the league. They lose their guard Zeitler, so that's a lot of the area that Montgomery is running behind. And obviously they lose the top head coach on the market this year with Ben Johnson, who has just drawn up a beautiful run game for them these past few years. So I think it would be hard for this run game not to step back, and I think Montgomery is the guy who does take the brunt of that, especially as probably the biggest benefactor of Ragnow in that line and just kind of that consistent run scheme. I think the Lions will not be as dominant of a run game, and Montgomery is kind of that dominance factor that we're going to run it at your face all game long. It's going to be the core of what we do. So I personally think he's in more of this low end RB2 this year. He has been able to fill in as an RB2 in years past, but the combined gives going into his targets and just the run game, I think, takes maybe a little bit of a step back. I think it's still going to be a good run game, but hard not to deteriorate a little after losing so much.
Yeah, I think Monty probably right on top of that tier would be the most appropriate spot to me. A guy that you are just kind of banking on to continue his goal line excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if you take a look at sports books, it's very rare that you'd see any projection of Monty clearing 800 yards on the ground. So it's clear that we don't really see him being this guy that's going to kill you in that way and kind of make more of his money just continuing to get into the end zone. Is this something that you can that you want to rely on for your RB2? Probably not, but I think the volume should be there enough. The Lions should still be good enough, and Monty should still be involved enough to warrant low end RB2 flex status.
Yeah, he would be. Oh, low glitch. He would be towards the top of this for me for sure. But I think that's where he belongs. Now let's shift to another powerful runner here in Derrick Henry, who definitely was one of the highlights of the fantasy season last year and just overall NFL season. I mean, the guy ran for over 1,900 yards. That backfield in Baltimore was definitely as advertised and one of the most dominant we've ever seen. The run game over there, I have no questions about. I think they'll pick up right where they left off as one of the best run games in the league. Just being in the backfield with Lamar for a guy like Derrick Henry is like an insane like advantage. I do think that maybe the elite like historic level efficiency that he had last year does maybe take a little hit, but because I mean the guy ran for 6 yards a carry last year and 1,900 yards, it would be pretty insane to repeat that. But I mean, inevitably a threat. I'm not worried any longer about Derrick Henry falling off a cliff. I mean, it's going to be 31 this year, but I mean, he just ran for pretty much 2,000 yards at 30. He's immune to this whole carries thing. He's just hasn't shown any deterioration as an athlete and is just a rock who I feel super safe about. He's one of these guys who has that floor that I love with a running back. I know he has the role. I know he's going to be great. And he's just one of the best running backs in the league. He doesn't have the passing chops that you like for high end, like elite running back. But I do think that Henry's a guy who can build your team around. He definitely was last year, and I mean, I'm not worried about Henry. I think for me, he would be in kind of the hero range, one of the last guys in the hero range, but definitely RB1 at least.
I agree very, very fully with that, what you just said about Henry. Like you said, last year's leader in yards per carry, pretty much 6, and last year's leader in yards after contact by far with over 900. This is a guy that last year I did have my skepticism around, mainly because of his age, but all that's out the window this year. Derrick Henry showed no signs of slowing down, and he's in the most dynamic and prolific, maybe backfield. If you want to say Detroit, that's fine, but him and Lamar are just pretty much impossible to scheme for. And I mean, another 16 rushing touchdowns last year, and he's stepping back, like I said, into one of the best offenses in the league, one of the best downhill running backs of all time. I have no problem if you want to throw Henry at the end of that hero RB tier. To me personally, he's my RB4 overall.
Yeah, and I mean, just it's a safe pick. He's what you look for in a hero running back, a guy who's going to be a threat for 100 yards and a touchdown every game. But moving on, we have a slightly very different build of running back in Devon Achane, but nonetheless another fantasy star here, and he is like kind of just the ultimate mold that you look for in like a cheeky like fantasy running back. He clearly has the role in Miami in the pass game and the run game last year. I think he had like 200 carries, close to like 80 catches. And when you watch Miami, it's clear that he's the guy who they want the ball in his hands. Again, whether it's giving it to him on a screen, giving it to him on a toss, they want him to be that big play threat for them, and they will make it an emphasis of getting him involved and getting the ball in his hands. That's what it felt like, kind of the Miami's number one goal last year. Just give the ball to Devon Achane and pray that he breaks off a 90-yard touchdown with all the speed he has. And I don't see why they will turn away from that strategy. They don't bring in really any competition this year. He's gonna be a key part of this offense. I think that he is definitely in this RB1 tier as a guy who's gonna just amass a lot of work and a lot of receptions, just has a very clear role as that kind of just the poster boy of that Miami offense at this point.
I think Achan in the RB1 tier is perfect. A guy that, to be honest, I haven't found myself drafting a lot of. And
He goes
that's not
early.
really. Yeah, he goes very early, and usually I'll find myself taking a Derrick Henry over him. But
I would too.
something to note for him, definitely. He was the RB1 on a points per game basis when Tua did play last year. He averaged 22.5. Without Tua, though, that sunk all the way to 8.7. So we see this huge range of outcomes here for Achan, and me as a whole, I think maybe my main hesitation and why I always do lean to Henry over him is just I don't really trust Miami as an offense. It kind of seems to me like the Mike McDaniel stuff. It was cool, it was fun, but it might be figured out at this point. And
yeah,
we're also putting a lot of stock into someone in Tua who could be one hit away from his career ending, right?
yeah.
So, like, if he goes down, Achan's stock is kind of in the toilet. So, for me, these factors definitely lead me to favor someone like Henry, but if Achan is healthy and Tua is too, he should be a rock solid RB1.
Yeah, and I call him like the poster boy of that Miami offense because it is just like very gimmicky. It's very like, let's try to get it out to A-Chain or Tyreek Hill or one of these guys who have so much speed and like kind of a cheap way and just see what they can do with it. It's like a lottery ticket every time you give the ball to Devon A-Chain. So they're going to break sometimes. And in PPR, like at worst, that's a point he's going to just rack up receptions and touches. So I personally think he's in this RB range. I probably personally, just because of the risk, I maybe would favor him over McCaffrey.
That's fair. I go either way there.
It's a tough one, but yeah, I don't want to be the guy to take McCaffrey again this year. I'm sorry. He burned me, scares me. He has 2 questionable Achilles.
I didn't even have him, and he scares me a lot.
Yeah. So with that being said, let's move on to DeAndre Swift, who just is in an interesting position here. I think a lot of people expected the Bears to buy in more to that Lions team build, invest heavily in the running back position and kind of find a lead guy, but they actually end up doing virtually nothing at the running back position, and we're in another position here where DeAndre Swift is the lead back, but now rather than it being for kind of a murky Bears offense, it's for a Bears offense that brings in Ben Johnson and invests even more in the offensive line and brings in some other weapons and looks to definitely improve this year. So, I mean, Swift is not my favorite running back from his talent standpoint. I don't think he is a very smart runner in terms of how he doesn't necessarily find the hole too well, doesn't have great vision, but he's a guy who is going to be a lead back in rising offense. He has his clear workload, and I see him going a lot in kind of that RB high end RB3 range, low end RB2 range, and I think that he's a great option there just based off the situation alone.
Yeah. DeAndre Swift, definitely an interesting outlook this year. He has the potential to be in a very fun system with Ben Johnson coming in, a guy who's known for scheming pass plays, of course, to the running back, and that should heavily favor Swift this year. I do see that I think he does have the potential to even finish as like a top 15 back if the Bears as a whole take a leap. But yeah, I think that kind of low end RB2 flex tier is pretty appropriate for him.
I see him at like the top of it just based off his thing. I'd maybe take him over Monty.
Yeah, I think I would take him over Monty just because he's the top guy, and then of course the favorable upside that we mentioned.
Yeah, not the most exciting pick, but I think it's pretty good for where he goes.
Good spot.
Isaiah Pacheco. I know you like Pacheco with where he goes this year. He does go late.
Yeah, if you can get an Isaiah Pacheco in your round 7 or round 8, I feel pretty great about that. I like him as like my 3rd to 4th RB, first one off the bench, and mainly just because of how Vegas is projecting the Chiefs this year. They're very favorable on them, and they seem to think that a bounce back offensive season is in store. And if that's the case, it's hard to imagine Isaiah Pacheco not being a huge beneficiary of this, especially because we've already seen it in the past. The main concern with him does come from how shaky he looked upon returning last year. He had the lengthy absence throughout the season. I believe it was his Achilles or something like that, but he was sidelined for
ankle, I think.
like 2 months. Ankle, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did not look the same upon return, and that even continued throughout the playoffs as well. I know he was not looking at his best, and I think his efficiency was well below like 4.5 yards a carry. But to me, again, the upside with Pacheco kind of lies in the same boat as a guy like Brian Robinson, where if they just find themselves as the lead back in this top offense, you can always just stumble your way into like 10 rushing touchdowns or maybe more in the best case scenario. So if you pair that with 800, 850 on the ground, that could be top 20 RB numbers. So to me, that kind of what if and scenario, and especially because we have previously seen Pacheco achieve these feats, I feel safe taking him in that 7th, 8th round and as like my 3rd or 4th RB.
Yeah, I agree. Pacheco is, well, first of all, I definitely agree that it's a little concerning. His lack of production last year, he looked a little rusty coming back for sure. And I know there's a viral video going around that doesn't necessarily support a bounce back for him in terms of like his explosiveness. He looked pretty slow on a couple of cuts. And it is a pick where you're just really banking on this offense and the opportunities there, which is not a bad idea. I mean, the Chiefs offense is going to be at least league average, depending on how much they get that explosiveness back. But I mean, we see even last year they were a team that was able to bring in a guy like Kareem Hunt, who is even in kind of a similar mold as Pacheco now, and just grind it down, get those like 4 yards per rush, like able to keep the chains moving. And Pacheco is going to be a guy who will get the goal line work on that team and hopefully can just take advantage of a great offense. I don't think he's a guy that you want in your starting lineup ideally though, so I think that leaves him more as kind of the RB3 with upside range in terms of maybe he can get kind of that juice back. Maybe the Chiefs offense will just be that elite for him.
Exactly. And just another small thing to note for him, I always like to think about when it's a player like this kind of their ADP in reference to last season, where if you wanted Isaiah Pacheco last year, it probably costed you a second or third round pick.
Yeah.
So that is the upside within Pacheco at the end of the day. So
yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how Kansas City uses their backs again this year with kind of a different spread. Last year, you go into the season, it's clearly Pacheco's backfield. This year, there's probably a little more ambiguity in there. But we got an easy one up next. Jahmyr Gibbs, one of the most exciting players in the league. I can just go ahead and put him right up there in the heroes. He's like pretty much top 5, latest like 6 pick in every draft. Just the face of like this new mold of running back where you have these small guys who can just break off plays at any times, like genuinely one of like the most electric, insane, like explosive athletes I've ever seen, and can even break tackles. I mean, not a big guy at all, but like when you move with like so much speed and acceleration, like you're hitting people that fast, like he's able to bounce off tackles and just do it all. I mean, he is just awesome. Jahmyr Gibbs is awesome. I love watching the guy.
Yeah, no need to overthink Jahmyr Gibbs this year. Definitely a hero RB1 that should be off the board, like you said, in the top 5 or 6 picks in every single draft. Last year's reigning RB1 and an incredibly efficient back, 5.6 yards a carry last year. He finished top 5 last year in rushing yards, despite being outside of the top 10 in attempts, which was very impressive to me. Another 500 yards through the air last season, almost 2,000 from scrimmage in total. And of course, like we kind of mentioned before, the only kind of knack you could come up with here is, of course, the departures of Ragnow and Ben Johnson. But again, I do really just like to circle back to this for reference. Vegas is really not scared of these departures. They have Gibbs locked in for the 4th longest odds still for Offensive Player of the Year, around plus 1,300.
Yeah, to me, with these departures, I don't think a guy like Gibbs is necessarily the most heavily affected. He's a guy who's going to be able to make his own regardless, a guy who's just that special of an athlete that when he has the ball in his hands, like he's gonna has a good chance of scoring whenever. And I mean, you see that last year, he had 20 touchdowns. So it's like he's not going to get the goal line work, but he doesn't even need it because he can do anything. He's Jahmyr Gibbs. He's the greatest. Love Jahmyr Gibbs. Easy conversation there. James Cook, a little more interesting of a conversation here. Cook last year was like obviously in a great offense, which you think is going to be a great offense again. And he was the touchdown guy in that offense. I think he had 16 touchdowns on the ground for James Cook last year, which does, I mean, kind of inflate his overall stats and just kind of value in fantasy. You don't know if TDs are usually the first thing that either regresses or progresses. So I don't know if you can pencil him in for 16 touchdowns again, but I mean, he is a good, valuable back outside of that. He is able to catch some passes out of the backfield, even though they switch it up and run kind of a lot of backs there. I do think that he is kind of one of these higher ranked running backs that does have more volume questions than you'd necessarily like. I mean, you see last year where Buffalo likes to spread it out amongst these guys. Ray Davis, guy who saw an increased workload as the season went on. They like Ty Johnson as a pass catcher, so he's not necessarily able to use all of his gifts and skill sets to its like utmost potential, but he was pretty explosive, pretty consistent runner last year. He had 4.87 yards per carry in an elite offense, which is, obviously leads to him getting 16 touchdowns. But I think he's a strong, like, around the top 20 backs or so. But I don't know if he'll have the same year in luck that he had last year.
I like James Cook as a strong to mid-range RB2. Um, all the stuff you said, yeah, he's in an awesome situation as the lead back on one of the best offenses in the league. So whenever that's the case, you're always gonna be in a favorable situation, and things should go your way, which they did to James Cook last year, as you said, landing 16 rushing touchdowns. Some regression can definitely be expected there, and my only other little concern with him is just he did barely reach 1,000 yards, and I think that one of the main catalysts there is, of course, he doesn't get as many carries and as much volume as a lot of the other guys around him. But his combination of efficiency, situation, goal line skill set, and his versatility, I think makes him a solid RB2.
Yep.
Maybe right in between like Chase Brown and Kamara.
That's exactly where I'd have
Yeah.
him. You feel good with him. You feel great with him as an RB2. I think that's perfect for him. So next we have Jaden Blue, who is definitely more in this kind of sleeper category. He is in a situation in Dallas where there isn't really like a clear lead back in that backfield, and him just being a rookie does give you that intrigue and potential where he can, take over like a bulk of the touches, and definitely has a pathway towards being like a number one back, which would value him a lot higher than where he's taken at. But I mean, he does have to get through Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders before that. While it doesn't sound tough, I mean, Blue is not a very highly drafted guy. He was like a 5th round pick or so, and definitely most known for his like receiving ability. So that's definitely a way he could get on the field. But I think he's definitely more of like a low tier upside swing guy, maybe even just more in that bench role, because it is a little aspirational to think of Blue as too much of a guy to rely on. He's really just kind of one of your last round pick guys.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's a good target for like your very last bench spot.
I wouldn't consider him a 3 at all.
Yeah, you can put him bench RB definitely. I like you said, the competition isn't anything crazy. Career 4 yards per carry runner in Javonte Williams, so there is definitely some opportunity for Blue to pave out a role for himself here in an offense that could be pretty solid. And I think that warrants a pick in one of the later rounds, but nothing more than that.
Mm-hmm. If we want to move on, we have J.K. Dobbins here, who had a pretty decent year last year in the LA for the Chargers. It was good to see him kind of get back to what he did in Baltimore previously. He wasn't necessarily like a guy who lit the world on fire, but was pretty solid in terms of was that like 900 yards, around 4.5 yards per carry, in an offense that wanted to run the ball, but maybe wasn't necessarily like a top of the league running back room. He enters this year in competition with RJ Harvey, the rookie at a UCF, who they drafted pretty highly in the 2nd round. So he will be in competition. The Broncos with Sean Payton, a team that loves to use a committee for running backs. So definitely not a workhorse. Definitely not really going to get the looks that he got last year. So hard to get too excited about him. Is anything more than like a bench guy?
Dobbins is another bench RB, like you said. Going to be sharing time with Harvey, and always injury risk with Dobbins as well. So another guy to target in your later rounds, but yeah, nothing too crazy.
Yep.
Last tier.
Jeez. Here we have interesting one. Joe Mixon had a non-football related injury. I think it was his foot or so, which is definitely not something that you want to hear this time of the year for a running back. I mean, Mixon did miss some time last year with injuries. I know he had to leave a couple games early. He was able to kind of have a career resurgence though when he was on the field, and definitely a guy who I wasn't expecting to have the type of year he had last year, where he did have a lot of games where he was putting up a lot of points, getting a lot of touches, and a lot of yards. I think there was a stretch where he was like uh, getting a lot of work, playing at least like half the snaps, and he was able to secure 18.1 fantasy points per game in the 15 games where he played at least 40% of the snaps. So I didn't love him as a pick last year. I can't say that I love him as a pick this year, even though he did end up exceeding expectations.
Yeah, I'm not loving his outlook right now, especially with that injury news. Like you
It's
said,
hard
yeah,
to kind of know where to place him with that.
yeah, I was thinking either right in front of Swift or like behind Connor.
Yeah,
Um,
I think he's probably dropped down to more of a low end RB2 at this point,
yeah,
just
that's
because of
fair.
the injury.
Of course, if he's good to go for week 1, he definitely has that
Yeah,
potential
if
for
he's good to go
substantial
for week one,
volume
he's
and
kind of in here.
right. But yeah, I think right next to Swift is good for now.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of just a situation that you're gonna have to monitor, see if he's able to start practicing a little before the season.
We'll keep you
Hopefully,
guys
is able
updated too.
to. Yeah. Jordan Mason, we mentioned him a little bit earlier as the piece that Minnesota brings in to maybe take a little bit off of Aaron Jones's plate. Was phenomenal last year as the fill-in for Christian McCaffrey. So anyone who took him as a handcuff in the late rounds last year was very happy. And yeah, I mean, I think this year I could definitely see this being more of a committee type of backfield where Mason is able to do some of the early down work, get in there, run in between the tackles. He's a good outside zone runner too. He was a great back for the Niners last year when he had that high usage in the Christian McCaffrey role as a running back. Obviously, you can't necessarily do the same things as a receiver that these guys do, but that's what Aaron Jones will do. That's what Aaron Jones will, provide for you. So it definitely is a question of how much we're actually going to see him used. But Mason is a definitely. I don't even know if I'd call him a handcuff. He's an intriguing guy because if Aaron Jones goes down, I do like him as a guy who is capable of being a lead back.
Yeah, maybe right behind Scadabo would be a good spot for him.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
a guy that we definitely project to get some volume and usage even with a healthy Jones. So, yeah, and upside for more, like you said, if an injury were to occur or if he exceeds expectations.
Yeah, I do think he is a little bit of a step above these bench guys. Obviously, for him to have a real fantasy impact, you'd maybe need an injury. But I'll let you take Josh Jacobs here.
Yeah, man. Definitely one of my guys this year and one of my favorite round 2 targets. Jacobs to me is just has one of the safest outlooks going into the season. We know who he is. He's a very strong back. He was second in yards after contact last season with over 700. In total, nearly 1,700 yards from scrimmage as a whole. He catches passes. He is effective on the ground. Had over 300 carries last season and finished 6th in rushing yards. And he was also top 4 in rushing touchdowns. So he checks all the boxes there for ways that he can generate points at the goal line, on the ground, and in the air. And to me, the deciding factor with Jacobs is there's just a lot less risk associated with Josh Jacobs than someone like McCaffrey mainly, or even an Ashton Genty. But that's a different debate. But we've already seen multiple like all-star or all-pro level seasons from a guy like Josh Jacobs, and he's coming back into a situation with a great quarterback and an offense that should be well above average. To me, he's a rock-solid RB1 and I wouldn't be surprised if he finished as like RB5 or 6 again this year.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail there with Jacobs. He is a very safe guy. Matt LaFleur always calls a good run offense, and Jacobs is the guy who is going to lead that, and he doesn't really have any competition in that aspect. He will just be a 3-down running back that you're going to be able to rely on. He doesn't typically get banged up too much throughout his career. I guess the only question with him would just be he does have a lot of tread on his tires over the year, but nothing substantial to be concerned about. I do like him as in this RB1 range. I think he's even kind of towards the top of this. I feel a lot safer with him over these guys like A-Chain and McCaffrey, who are both more injury prone, maybe higher ceilings, but definitely not definitely aren't definitely sleeping a little bit better when you have a locked in guy who's going to get you guaranteed probably 300 carries or so. I mean, he's been a mainstay in that category for most of his career, so I'm right there with you. I like Jacobs.
Yes, sir.
Much grosser conversation here with Javonte Williams. We touched on him with Jaden earlier. Honestly, Williams goes a little bit before Blue, but I feel kind of the same taking either of them. I mean, not a bad running back. Certainly has lost all the juice that he had when he first entered the league. After that ACL injury in beginning of his second year, he never has really looked the same and is definitely more in that kind of one cut back mold now. Isn't going to really force too many broken tackles. So he's not going to be a stud. I wouldn't say he's a guy who has a lot of upside. I think he's kind of in this bench thing solely there off of usage.
Yeah, I think right next to Blue is
there.
Pretty fair spot for Javonte. Don't have much to say about Javonte. I mean, he definitely underwhelmed the past few seasons out in Denver, and I don't really expect things to change too much for him. And like I said, a reason I do like Blue as a target at the end of your draft is just because I'm not a big believer in Javonte.
Yeah, and then we have a guy who I believe in a good amount here in Jonathan Taylor. I've always just really liked Jonathan Taylor in fantasy as a guy who just is such a solid runner and has been behind such a quality O-line for most of his career, and also is in a situation with a great run game play caller in Shane Steichen. When Anthony Richardson plays, that rushing attack is also adds another element with the running QB, and even Daniel Jones will be able to pose a little bit of a threat as a runner. So I know Steichen likes to tap into that. I seem to just always get burned on the fact that he misses a couple games each year, kind of here and there. But I mean, we saw last year, like in the second half, once he kind of was able to like shrug off all those kind of short-term injuries and was able to build some consistency behind that line, he was super efficient, like with his carries, and was able to rattle off like a very good end of the year last year. So he's always in kind of this workhorse RB1 category just because he is going to get, when he's healthy, he is going to get the usage. And I mean, last year, like quietly, the guy had 1,400 yards while missing like a ton of time. He can just rack up yards because he's going to get plenty of carries and he's able to sustain those carries. And I mean, still definitely the potential to have like one of those superstar years like he had while back now in like 2022 or so. Yeah. Where he went into the next year as the 101 after having like a 1,800 yard year. Guy who can always break off a big one. He has that breakaway speed. He's a strong runner. Maybe not necessarily as explosive or as bouncy as a guy like Gibbs or Genty, but just a solid, strong runner who I think is right there with Jacobs in that same mold. Kind of a toss-up between those guys, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would be definitely fine with you putting him right next to Jacobs. The reason I would favor Jacobs is just probably the offensive outlook of Green Bay as a whole in comparison to
Hmm.
Indianapolis. But yeah, I mean, like you said, a guy who missed multiple weeks last year and still cleared 1,400 yards and finished, I think, fourth overall in rushing yards.
Like, that's
Taylor is just a
crazy.
beast when he's healthy, and he's always going to be efficient on the ground. And like you said, the Steichen offense will keep the defense on their feet at all times, and just a perfect complement there. Um, a guy who is a pretty solid, like mid to late second round pick, especially if you go receiver round one, you should feel good coming back around getting Taylor as an RB1.
Hmm. And if we want to move on here, we have Caleb Johnson slotted next, who was taken by Pittsburgh in the third round this year. Um, was kind of getting some like baby Derrick Henry comps as a runner coming out of Iowa this year. And you can see it a little in the way he plays. I mean, he's not 250 pounds like Derrick Henry is. Nobody is. He's some once in a lifetime guy, but he is kind of one of those speed train runners who fits perfectly in a wide zone scheme, which he's going into in Pittsburgh with Arthur Smith. So I think he can fill into this Najee role pretty well, where we saw Najee last year didn't necessarily make the most of his touches from an efficiency standpoint, but still was getting like 18 or so touches per game, which is pretty awesome. And if you can get a more juiced up, explosive Caleb Johnson in here who can, break off a couple big runs every couple weeks, I mean, you'll see definitely some spike weeks for him, I think. And just exciting to have a younger guy in here who can kind of bite off some more carries and, a competitive Pittsburgh team that wants to run the ball. He definitely has a lot of potential, and is slotted in as kind of the RB1 there now. So up in the air with what he's going to do, but what do you think about him?
Yeah, I like Caleb this year for sure. I think it's a great landing spot for a running back, like you said. North of 1,500 yards last season for Iowa and over 20 rushing touchdowns. A guy with a lot of upside and a very strong downhill running style that I think fits well in Pittsburgh. I would feel pretty comfortable throwing him maybe right behind Brian Robinson or
Yeah,
right in that
I definitely
range.
consider him to be in this um low end RB2 to flex tier. I don't know if I'd feel
Mhm.
great about him as my RB2, but he's a guy
Right.
who I do like as a third running back if you kind of want to make a solid add to that position as maybe even your flex guy. I think yeah, he's right in here. Can fall
Yeah.
anywhere. I mean, I might even take him over Brees Hall. I really don't like Brees
I don't
Hall.
hate that, man. I feel a very similar way about Brees.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry for making this the Brees Hall rag show to any Jets fans out there, but I'm sure they're frustrated with him too. But I'll let you talk about Kenneth Walker here. Awesome dude.
Yeah, getting right into Kenneth, one of my favorite players to watch in the league, probably my favorite back to watch. Just an incredible athlete, and anytime he touches the ball, a big play is within the cards. He did miss 6 games last year, but when he was healthy and played the full game, he gave you over 16 fantasy points a game. So we know that he is capable of this elite top level production. It's just a matter of him being able to stay on the field and keeping stringing together positive week after week. Of course, he is an elite talent at the position, but we do know there are some questions revolving mainly around a new look offense with Sam Darnold coming in, and then Clint Kubiak, who did come in, I believe, mid last season. And with Walker, of course, there is always going to be Zach Charbonnet lurking in the shadows as well. If you do draft Kenneth Walker this year, it's a pretty awesome idea to try to prioritize Charbonnet if you can in like the later rounds of your draft. He definitely falls. You can find him in around 10 or 11 and just one of the best handcuffs to have in the league if Walker does go down. But I love Kenneth Walker as a player, and if he stays healthy, I think a top 10 running back season is easily within the cards. For that reason, I do like him in the strong RB2 tier because, of course, he has that upside, but we just haven't seen him put it together with the health yet. So I like him around maybe between James Cook and Chase Brown, that type of area. But
Yeah, I would have him exactly there. I think Walker is a guy who you watch him and you see just one of the most juiced up running backs in the league, like a guy who clearly can have one of these explosive top running back seasons whenever. He just unfortunately has never quite had that situation in Seattle with a line that we've seen really kind of deteriorate in the middle there, and just kind of hasn't been the focus of this offense and kind of a pass heavy Geno Smith offense. They bring in Clint Kubiak from New Orleans, who obviously designed a pretty nice run game to start the year last year when we saw the Saints and Kamara. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So I do think that there is the chance that the run game does become a little more of a focus here, especially when you bring in a guy like Sam Darnold who loves to play in kind of that play action style offense. So I think Walker pairs really well with this concept of Seattle transitioning to a wide zone team. And you mentioned Charbonnet. I think that the kind of rise of Charbonnet last year, coming on as one of the better backup running backs in the league, could potentially even help Walker out. We've seen kind of a trend of little injuries that have taken him out for large chunks of the season throughout his career, which is unfortunate because when he's on the field, he's just always kind of creating something out of nothing. So I'd love to see him in a situation this year where he's able to get a little more staggered, able to come in for those juice plays, and is able just to show what he can do. And I think we all hope that happens for Kenneth. So I like him in that RB2 range. I think right where you mentioned is perfect.
And definitely upside for more. So he's an exciting pick to me.
I mean, yeah, he's a guy who has hero RB upside. I think from a talent standpoint, he is there. Just unfortunately, his situation has never allowed for that, and his health really hasn't allowed for that either. So hopefully, is able to go into maybe a healthier ecosystem where not as much is getting asked of him, and he's able to excel in that explosive role. But yeah, also actually want to mention that he is a pretty decent pass game guy too. Just a guy who can take a screen the distance and has throughout his career. But I think another guy in this same kind of tier, much different situation with Kyron Williams, but in my opinion, another strong running back too. Last year, Kyron was a little touchdown heavy and maybe didn't have the overall production and efficiency that you'd like to see. He is in a McVay offense that does to balance the pass game and the run game. But he got 14 touchdowns last year. So I mean, you're in a good offense that's going to consistently be in the red zone. That's kind of the name of the game for him. I do think that there is upside for a better running season from him. I think he is more explosive and more of a bouncy guy than we saw last year, and he is in his prime and doesn't have necessarily too much of an injury history. So I would like to see him kind of bounce back, but I think he is a higher floor guy who, despite having maybe not the receiver work that you look for, he is going to get a lot of touches and be a staple of a pretty good Rams offense.
Yeah, to me, I agree. Kyron is a strong RB2. Someone who did finish top 10 in rushing yards last season with 1,300. Just wasn't the most efficient, about 4.1 yards a carry. But like you said, with Williams, one of the big selling points is that volume that he does receive. Good on the goal line. Just a guy who doesn't have overwhelming upside to me. So I think a strong RB2 is a good spot for him. I know some people do like to throw the name Blake Corum in the mix, but I don't expect him to be too big of a factor for Kyron this year.
Yeah, it is definitely something to consider, though. If Kyron doesn't, if he doesn't get better than 4.1 yards a carry, I do think that the Rams could look somewhere else for a little explosiveness. So you do want to see him perform a little better, but is just has a clear role in a valuable offense. So I think he's kind of right in this mix. Doesn't have the upside of these guys, so I think he's kind of in this James Cook range or
Yeah, that's a
so.
good debate. I guess I would go Kyron over Cook.
Yeah, it's really either or, but two guys in a great offense. I think Cook we've maybe seen he doesn't get the same amount of carries, and they like to split it up clearly a little bit more.
He's definitely
Whereas,
more efficient, but yeah, the volume helps for Kyron.
yeah, not gonna have to deal with those Josh Allen on the goal lines either. So another thing to consider between those two. But we have our Chargers offense here, and I might actually skip over Najee just to talk
Yeah,
about Amarion for a second. And Amarion's a guy who like I found myself just loving in drafts. Like I'm willing to take him early. This is a guy who was taken very early by the Chargers in I think they had the 26th pick or so, first round pick, and uh, that's a position where when you're taking a running back in the first round, you're not bringing this guy in to be a backup, even though they do invest in Najee Harris in the offseason. Hampton just, I think, gives you like a way higher ceiling. I see him in kind of that Josh Jacobs mole as like an every down guy, a big, like tough back who is going to be able to churn out some yards after contact. Just going to I expect him to immediately come in and be one of the better downhill runners in the league. One of these guys who can just physically impose himself onto defenses. I think he has a great opportunity with a team that we saw in like early last year wanted to run the ball a lot, but maybe wasn't there from a personnel standpoint. They go out this offseason, get Mekhi Becton from the Eagles as an interior offensive lineman, and then they draft Hampton early. So this is a team like led by Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman that wants to run the ball, and they're drafting a running back in the first round. That's a clear sign to me that they think that this kid can be a star and be kind of the face of this run game that they expect to be an emphasis of the team. So you add on top of the fact that Najee, who's the main concern with Hampton cutting into that workload. Najee has not practiced yet after a firework incident where people are questioning if he even has an eye right now. He's only been seen with sunglasses on and like a hoodie at practice. Hasn't practiced since that. So I think Hampton's a guy like if you're gonna give him an opportunity to go like no competition from a guy in Najee who let me get this straight. Like I think Najee is like a pretty solid back, like uh hits the hole, like not overly explosive, but definition of like a solid, like middle of the pack back, and definitely was a good addition. But I think you're bringing in downhill star here. I expect him to immediately come in and have kind of that like Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor level of talent. I see him in that mold as a big guy. So personally, in drafts, I am fine taking him as like a very strong RB2. Obviously, there is more of the question. I'm not ready to plug him up next to those guys in the tier, but I would not be surprised if he's taken as like a hero running back next year.
Yeah, and that's a great point to make when projecting rookies, especially with a guy like Genty too, where if you look back and think about rookie year, Bijan Robinson and Gibbs, they were late first round, early second picks, and they've been in that area ever since, right? And only have moved up.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely a good way to look at it. But yeah, I love me some Omarion Hampton this year too. Everything you said, even kind of with the Josh Jacobs mold, I think this is also such a great offense to slip into, like you mentioned as well. He's an elite prospect heading to this highly favorable situation. He is someone that I could even see have like a sneaky RB1 finish after a really strong second half of the season. In this run heavy scheme, I think that's definitely something within the cards. If you look back last year with the Chargers, I mean, J.K. Dobbins, who got 900 yards and 9 touchdowns out of him at a pretty efficient clip, and Marion Hampton, to me at least, projects to be a lot more effective than someone like Dobbins could be.
Mm-hmm.
So the ceiling for him is very exciting. If we even look what Hampton did in college, I mean, over 1,600 yards a senior season, 5.9 yards a carry, and 15 touchdowns. Like you said, a very powerful downhill runner. He can pick up extra yardage. He has awesome contact balance. I'm definitely sold on Hampton as a strong RB2.
Yeah. I definitely see the path for him being in that RB1 category, which is why I love taking him just as a guy who we could look back and see a lot of value in where he was taken. So, I mean, I'm like stupidly high on Hampton. Like me personally, I feel even better with him as an RB2 as like even some of these guys. Like I would have him in like right here, but I don't know where you
Personally,
like
I'd
him.
probably put him between Walker and Kyron.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm maybe even like a little bit of an Mario Hampton psycho. Like I'm
No
definitely
shame in that.
overdrafting him a little. But it's just a scenario I believe in, and if you guys have been
Hey, he
listening, you
checks all the
know,
boxes, man. He really does.
yeah, you guys know that I love taking my shot on prospects early. So definitely see some value there. And I think that makes this Najee Harris a pretty quick conversation. He is pretty much just a handcuff at this point. Then if Hampton's coming in here, would be hard for him to be a viable option if there's no Hampton injury. So I think we can just plug him in. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe even the
he's a bench
bottom of
RB.
there because those other guys are more in a committee. He's just a handcuff.
Really,
yeah.
just wanted to say quick, just taking a look at who remains on the bottom, outside of Saquon and Tony Pollard, there's really not too much in terms of relevant backs left. But if we do quickly want to touch on Judkins, we can definitely do that.
I was planning on just going right to where Pollard is, because after that it's handcuffs and stuff. I kind of tried
I see
staggering
Henderson there too.
it.
Yeah,
Yep.
sounds good.
So yeah, with Judkins, not going to talk too much on him because it's unknown what's happening in his legal situation. But he is a guy, kind of similar build of back to a Marion Hampton, big, explosive, downhill back. But we don't know if he's going to play. So I mean, he is one of these guys with upside. If he does get to play, he does look like the favorite to kind of take on a RB1 role in Cleveland. So I do think he has upside, but kind of a TBD with what's going on there. Ray Davis, kind of just bench guy.
He's a bench RB. He doesn't really bring much fantasy appeal unless the James Cook goes down.
Right. And then here we have RJ Harvey, who is a little bit more of an exciting conversation. I mentioned earlier that Sean Payton does love this kind of committee running back style. So RJ Harvey isn't going to be an every down guy, rookie in the same role as like an Amari Hampton type of thing. But he does have a reputation as being explosive guy who can catch passes, and I think people are kind of trying to pencil him into this Alvin Kamara role that obviously saw so much success in New Orleans under Sean Payton. But for me, there's a little too many questions in the air to take Harvey with the ADP that he has as kind of like a 5th or 6th round guy. I mean, I definitely see the potential, but he is making a big step up from UCF. Uh, I do think he maybe even was a little overdrafted as a second round pick. I do think they probably wanted to get a guy more like a Travion Henderson in there. But I mean, I think Harvey will be a good back, but I don't know if he's a guy who is really capable of having like a RB1 type of role. There's also a lot of solid competition in Denver in Dobbins, who we mentioned. They drafted Audric Estime a couple years back. So Jaleel McLaughlin is a guy who has had some flashes, and just a
Yeah,
team that likes to committee approach. So
I know that a lot of people were kind of surprised that they passed on Hampton with that first round pick over in
mm-hmm.
Denver. But yeah, I mean, with Harvey, like you said, the upside is definitely there, especially if an injury prone J.K. Dobbins does go down. But yeah, I would say probably a high RB3 with upside at this point.
Mm-hmm.
He was ridiculously efficient in college, but like you said, you can't take that with a grain of salt at UCF. But yeah,
Yeah,
there's a path to him finishing as a top 20 back, but I don't think it's too likely.
yeah. I mean, all the explosiveness would obviously have to translate. He is kind of a smaller back, even at that. So I do question if he can be a guy who can command too many carries. I mean, he's 5'8", 200 pounds, so hasn't necessarily proven to be able to be a three down back at the NFL level, which I think limits his upside, but he still definitely has some upside. So probably throw him in probably above Scat.
I'd
He
say
probably
above
has
Scat.
the most upside of anyone in this tier, just from an
Agreed.
athletic and rookie standpoint. But if we want to move on, I think Rachaad White is pretty clearly a bench guy with Bucky arising. He will have this pass catching role, so definitely some PPR promise, but not a complicated conversation with Rachaad White. He's not a great runner of the football, pretty inefficient there. A good receiver though, so that'll be his role. Pretty
Yeah,
single dimensional.
I would just say that his PPR upside would probably put him at the top of that tier to me,
Yeah.
but not that big of a deal.
Um, this is an easy
Oh,
one.
easy one, yeah.
Yeah.
A guy who they kind of put a little bit far down there, but
Yeah.
yeah. Um, of course,
What needs to be
the
said?
reigning offensive player of the year. Not too much needs to be said about Saquon in one of the best offensive situations in the league, running behind what is probably the best offensive line in the league with elite quarterback play and reigning Super Bowl champion. The only concern, of course, is the injury history that he does possess and the insane amount of volume and touches that he received last season. But he's still off the board within the first 5 or 6 picks every single draft.
Yeah, barring an injury, Saquon's going to be a top 3 to 5 running back at the very least. Easily could be the running back one, and just, I mean, the guy had 2,000 yards last year. I don't think
And
they really need to say much about him. He's behind one of the best lines in the league. I mean, the best line in the league. It's a great scenario for Saquon.
and
Happy
just
for
one
him.
thing to mention, I kind of feel like even though he did finish technically as the RB2, I think in most people's mind he was the RB1 last season.
Yeah, didn't
Just
he
because he
sit
was,
out the last
yeah,
game?
he sat out the last week, and I think Gibbs popped for like 40 or something crazy in that
Yeah,
last week.
he was
But
the RB1 for
yeah,
real
Saquon pretty much all
purposes.
year held down that spot, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he did again.
Yeah. Um, Especially because a guy like Gibbs, did benefit so much from that Montgomery injury, which you can't really project forward. We got the Jacksonville backfield up next. Jacksonville. But it doesn't really matter because it's a unexciting room. I think
It is.
until these guys can until you can really get a feel for what they're going to do, which nobody knows. They have kind of 4 running backs and Bigsby, ETN. They draft Bashul Tutin and Laqueen Allen, who all have kind of decent avenues to get some touches in this backfield. So I do think it will be a committee. I think ETN is probably the most intriguing of the options, and the committee is kind of the most capable from a do-it-all standpoint, whereas Bigsby, probably more of the heavy power back, probably will command the goal line role, but ETN definitely has a little bit of upside. So I would even consider him in that kind of RB3 with upside range, because if he does get back to his role from 2 years ago, he has shown that he is a back who can, run it all over run pretty much every gap. Does have the pass catching ability. So I think there's upside for him, and could be a
Yeah.
pretty good offense. Bigsby,
Yeah.
I'd say, is more of the bench guy.
Definitely, yeah. And then ETN, I'd even throw maybe just at the end of RB3 with upside.
Yeah,
But
not super
important
exciting.
thing to note with ETN is like this guy cost you probably a second, third round pick last season. So if you can get him at 10 or 11, there is definitely upside for him to return value there. But yeah, I mean, just too many question marks around the backfield as a whole to draft him much higher.
Yeah. And if we want to transition into my guy, Travion Henderson here, the newly acquired New England Patriot, who we took pretty early in the second round in the draft, notably had 7 yards carry last year at Ohio State, and I think he figures to be the third down back role to start the year, but I think he's a guy who, the more reps he gets, hopefully the more explosive plays that he generates, he could see his role grow throughout the season. But I think at the start of the year, at least, he will be probably not the RB1, probably starts out with Ramondre as the RB1, because we do like some Ramondre here in New England, even after kind of a slower year last year, that I don't think too much of the blame deserves to be on him for how the offense ended up coming out with obviously a pretty poor line and all. But yeah, I'm surprised Ramondre is not on here. He would be in kind of the bench to RB3 range. But Travion, I think, certainly fills in as kind of this RB3 with upside, especially with where he goes in drafts. And I hope I'm not selling it short, because he really does have upside to potentially unseat Ramondre and take like a role as like a star running back. He's shown to be an explosive guy in that Gibbs role that we keep talking about. So I think by the end of the season, he could be like a starting caliber running back for your fantasy season. But the thing is, just to start, he's not going to have that role kind of handed to him on a silver platter, barring any injuries or so. So starting out as a third down back, it will hurt his overall numbers, but you hope that there's the potential for him to rise as the season goes on. But I do prefer him to a Harvey, because there are kind of less potential threats to his workload. And I would say that he is just was the higher drafted player. I think he is better talent than Harvey overall, and played at a little more proven of a school. So
Yeah,
I like the swing on him a little more.
I think he is definitely better than Harvey. And like you said, 7 yards per rush or yards per carry. Really, no joke at all. He was highly efficient at Ohio State, and he's coming into a great situation for a young offense that is looking to continue to grow. I was even going to say I'm not opposed to him, like right behind Caleb Johnson, but yeah,
Yeah,
I think he's fine right at the front of where Travion is, mainly because of, like you said, how Ramondre should still be heavily involved.
yeah, and I love Travion as like kind of a upside shot, and like taking him, he goes around like RB25 in ADP right now. And I love him at that ADP. It's hard to imagine him as like a week one, like flex guy, though, unfortunately, because you do have early season questions about the role there, so that's why I see him more as an upside shot. Week 1, I could not see him like being my flex and being too happy about it, but I do like taking the swing because he is a guy who has potential to, take over this backfield. And if he was coming in to this team and we don't have Ramondre or anyone to threaten him, he is more in this low end RB2, strong RB2 role, just kind of having to prove himself. But we'll see as his career goes on. And then I think we can cap it off here with Pollard as easily like the most relevant guy in this last group.
Yeah.
You want to talk about Pollard?
Yeah, Pollard, I feel like last year might have been a little bit under the radar, just because of how poor the team was. But he did finish, or he tied for 12th in total rushing yards last year with what pretty well over 1,000, about 1,079 yards. He wasn't the most efficient, but again, you can kind of chalk that up to also being a product of how poor the Titans were.
Mm-hmm.
I do like Pollard this year, and I know in our initial fantasy football video where we did our draft, we talked a little bit at the beginning about Tyjae Spears and how he has been getting some of those first team reps in their training camp. But I still think that this is definitely Tony Pollard's backfield. And I think with Ward coming in, there's definitely room for improvement as well. I see Pollard as someone in that low end RB2 flex tier. And I mean, he could be a weekly type of RB2. I'd feel better about him as like the third back on my team. But yeah, I might put him like maybe right in front of Brian Robinson, right around that area.
Yeah, I think he's certainly in that kind of RB3 range where kind of after you have your lineup set and you're looking for some running back depth, he definitely jumps out as a good option. I know there was the report that Tyjae Spears might be tapping into the usage a little bit, but yeah, Pollard is a good explosive runner, very fast, can contribute in the pass game. And I mean, if he has a similar role to what he did last year, he'll be a value pick at his ADP. So I think he's, perfect as an RB3, which I think he was probably more of like an RB3, low end RB2 last year. So I don't see anything that's stopping him from getting back to that unless he does just take a hit from some Tyjae Spears favoritism. But I don't think we need to touch on most of these guys below. They're mostly handcuffs, so you could consider them in that bench RB tier. But wow, man, this was a monster, coming out ranking these 40 running backs, and I feel good about our rankings. I like how this looks.
I think we did a pretty great job here. Yeah, definitely covered a lot of different guys. And for any of you watching, of course, feel free to comment down below what you might agree with or disagree, what you think we got right and wrong. Because, of course, with these rankings, it's all situational and everyone's going to have their own opinions. But we kind of thought this was a good idea to do together because then we can kind of collaborate on it and put together this one solid list for you guys. But yeah, I think it looks good.
You got anyone else you want to shout out or anything? I know I shouted Ramondre out a little.
Yeah, I'll give a quick shout to my guy, Tyrone Tracy down there, who I did see as kind of one of the other guys we didn't touch yet. But I do expect, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if like him and Scadabo's like a clean 50-50 split. That's like almost how it feels like this backfield might be, which isn't great for fantasy purposes. So, yeah, I mean, Tracy and Cam go around the same spot. I feel like around the 80s or 90s, around 9 or 10. And if you land either of the guys, you can feel good about them as a bench stash, especially if the other was to get hurt.
Mm-hmm. And with all the Breece Hall slander that we've done, I feel like we kind of have to mention Braylon Allen as a potential solid late round flyer. I mean, he'd definitely be in this bench RB role because you don't want to have to rely on him. But I thought he looked great last year as an athletic big back and a guy who I think definitely could unseat Breece Hall as a runner, pushing him off to more of like a passing back capability where Allen looked just pretty dominant last year. He's young, he's growing.
Would certainly be interesting to see, man. What a fall from glory that would be for Brees.
Yeah, I do think. I mean, based on Glenn's comments and just based on performance from last year, I do think that trends to be more of a committee. So if it is, I do like the upside swing on Allen just as a player. I thought he looked good. Another guy
Definitely.
I'd maybe shout out is Roshan Johnson. We said that Swift has a great setup in Chicago as kind of the only relevant back there, but Roshan would be the guy who could sweep in and have more of that between the tackles role and would be probably their goal line threat. I think he's worth a late round shot. I'd also I might have talked about Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, but he's drawing a lot of talk from Washington camp. And then, yeah, last guy
And
I'd say is Brashard Smith, rookie for the Chiefs, guy who, similar to the Jaden Blues, the Merritts, these backfields that are less established. If you want to take a shot on a rookie that could, explode and burst onto the scene as maybe a RB1 type of guy there.
yeah, and funny enough, I was just going to say Kareem Hunt, just more for the same reason. Just
Yeah.
because if you don't believe in the Pacheco bounce back, it'd be a good late round target.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, you mentioned Charbonnet down there as a top tier handcuff, and yeah, could be more of a committee there too as we move forward. But yeah, this was awesome. I had a ton of fun doing these with you.
Yes, sir. Great
And
time.
yeah, if we want to look towards the future, we'll be back next week to rank some of the Western Conference. We started the Eastern
Woohoo.
Conference last episode, so things
That's
might
a
get
good
a
one.
little more exciting with the Western Conference. Clearly, the better of the two conferences, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do a tier list similar to this, but for receivers. So a lot to get into there, and yeah, super excited for it. You got anything else to say to the viewers before we say goodbye, Lucas?
Yeah, just again, if you are still with us here, thank you so much for watching. It does mean a lot to us. And like Owen just forecasted, we got a lot more fun stuff coming. So if you like what you saw today, of course, feel free to hit the subscribe and leave us a like. Leave us a comment, anything that you want us to cover, anything like that. We're always going to be open to that. But yeah, you should see our next video out maybe next 4 or 5 days. Looking forward to covering that Western Conference, man.
Hell yeah, brother. Thank you for watching, guys. Like you said, drop a like, comment, subscribe, support the channel. Let us know what you want to see. We're here for you. Well, that's all for the running back tiers. Thank you, guys.